Youth sport is a billion-dollar industry. Athletic development plays a significant role in that. I'm your host, Nathan Parnham, athletic development coach and author of The Sporting Parent. Here, I'll share my thoughts on youth athletic development. Welcome to The Get Down, a podcast for parents, coaches, and schools involved in the youth sporting landscape to help set your athletes or programs up for success. Before we get stuck into today's episode, I just want to give a huge thanks to our platinum sponsor, Play. Play is a global leader in high-performance fit-outs. I've worked with a team at Play for many years now, not only due to the quality of products, but because I fundamentally align with their vision to inspire human performance. From their industry-proven athletic flooring, Icon X racks, to their equipment line, they are a testament to what high performance is all about. Check them out at play.us or on social media to learn more, including our show notes for further information.
1, 2, 3, 4.
This guest episode is brought to you by Gymaware, the #1 velocity-based training company in the market. Been around for over 22 years and is deservingly synonymous with VBT. Gymaware Flex, in particular, is greatly desired by high schools due to its modest price point, ease of use with youth athletes, and for me personally in these environments, it suits multiple purposes, which is why I've highlighted in episode number 3 the necessity in choosing technology for that reason in the school settings. Gymaware has recently launched a Fundamentals of VBT certification led by elite weightlifting coach Travis Marsh. The course is accredited by the ASCA and the NSCA with CEU points, which always comes in handy in furthering your education. It's 30% off until February end using code VBTFUN30, so jump on it ASAP. Check out their websites or Instagram for more options and information, including in our show notes at the bottom or after this episode.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Welcome to episode number 8, which is actually our second guest episode on the Get Down podcast. I'm extremely grateful for this individual jumping on the podcast and sharing his insights. Not only has he played a monumental role in my formative years as a coach, he provided me with some work experience or internship opportunities in the earlier days, and then eventually translated into my first full-time coaching role at Westfield Sports High. The reason why I say it's monumental is because as a coach, when you evolve, it's not often until the back end and the later years throughout your coaching journey that you really learn to appreciate the time and the responsibility that people above you in senior coaching positions give you the opportunity to explore, fail, learn along the way, and then hopefully through their advice, in conjunction with your own coaching methodologies, that allow you to learn and be the coach that you can be. So I'm extremely grateful to Trevor Morgan in jumping on the Get Down podcast. Trevor has extensive experience in football, being soccer for those Australian and international listeners as well. He has been the director of football at Westfield Sports High School, dating back as early as 1997, eventually transitioning into the Western Sydney Wanderers as the assistant coach and also head coach of the National Youth League. Trevor also transitioned into Football Australia and has been there for several years, holding multiple job titles, namely the technical director and then also the men's technical director and the head coach for the under-20 men's team. So without further ado, I'll introduce Trevor Morgan. Welcome to the podcast, Trevor.
Thanks, Nath. It's great to see you too, mate. So, and looking forward to having a chat with you.
Yeah, likewise. So we'll get straight into this. So I suppose for me personally, you've been involved in producing some of the biggest talent in Australian football for well over 2 decades. to put this into perspective for the listeners, when it comes to from here on through, I'll refer to it as football, but soccer for those who are a little bit old school, or for other countries around the world as well. Can you give us an idea of how many Socceroos and or Matildas that Westfield Sports High School has actually produced over the years?
Well, look, I'm going to give you the number, but you really got me going, because when you sent through the note on that, I had to do the research, and I thought I was in the ballpark. So from reading through it, it's 31 internationals, 15 women, 16 men, at full international level. And then there's obviously the youth internationals, which is another huge number. But I had to go back through, back to the beginning of the program,
Oh,
and
wow.
apologies if I missed one or two players. There's probably even some that have done it, but and we're talking some that have had a small number of caps, and some who've played 120, 130 times for their country. So,
Wow.
yeah, pretty big
That's
number.
huge. Oh, mate, that's huge. And I just want to say, awesome. Thank you very much for doing your due diligence in being so astute with the number. I thought you were just going to pluck a number out of your hat, because I know you're quite proud of every, Socceroo, Matilda and whatnot who actually gets through to that level. So I appreciate the time that you put into it. So I suppose for me personally, like, as I've evolved as a coach over the years, sometimes it takes us to kind of get down the track before you come to a realization that certain coaches and their methodologies have had on us as a coach. And for me, there were two massive things that stood out and continue to remain present in my mind that you exuberated in throughout your entire time as the football director at Westfield Sports High, and for my short stint there. And the first one being just being a good, respectable person with values, and that every athlete in the football program would shake hands at the beginning and the end of sessions and say thanks to me, who was just essentially a supplementary coach. But I know they did that to you and every other coach as well. And then the second point that I wanted to raise was that it didn't matter how good or what the, I suppose, so-called potential of the players were, that you treated them all the same. So I suppose the question I have for you is, how important was it then, and is it still for you to not only produce good footballers, but they're just to make sure that they're good people as well? And what's your thoughts on that?
Thanks, Nathan. It's a really interesting question. I think it's one of the key things is we're talking about a football or a sports environment within a school, right? So you have to take a long-term athlete development approach, and that means you have time, but you don't have time to accept things that won't get them there. If your kid's struggling for a while for whatever reason, that's okay. But so I think your main job working in a development program is to try and prepare them for life after, and the world they're going to go into. And so along the way, if you want all of those people to have a chance of chasing that dream, the day-to-day's got to be good. So you can't have sloppy standards, and you can't just refer just to the sport growth. You really got to challenge them as people to make sure that they understand if they drop behind in their studies, that there's a chance they'll stop training for a while. There's consequences to being irresponsible, and there's definitely opportunities for those who the fire starts to burn, and then they really start to excel as a human being. Because even if they don't become a professional footballer, there's going to be a lot of life skills out of challenging themselves day to day for 5, 6, 7 years if they're part of our primary school program. And whether they make it or they don't make it, I think it's what you're trying to help them achieve, and to understand we're in this together and we need each other to be successful. And there's not a lot of room for being selfish or being rude or being unreliable. People need you to commit.
Yeah, and I think it's a really great point of what you raised, because you often see it in that a lot of I suppose talented or earmarked players from an early age feel like they can essentially get away with murder, and then they, at some stage they turn into adults, and their actions and everything that come as a consequence of whether that's that element of entitlement that they've been earmarked from an early age comes into it. And we've seen it unfortunately multiple times in the media throughout the years with talented sports people who kind of essentially just can't control themselves and function in a day-to-day society. So I think it's a really great point that you raised, and something that really separates a good development coach from those who focus more on the sport alone, or trying to excel or get their name attached to a particular athlete as they're coming through. And I suppose it kind of leads me to my next point, and you've discussed the humanistic side of it. But something for me that really stood out was that I think a big challenge in youth sport, and particularly a coach, following on from what I've just said, is that often coaches will try and kind of piggyback off those who are showing early talent or signs of talent in a particular sport. But for you, from my memory and my viewing and opinion of it, it was very much an equal parts for all. And is that something that you were conscious from the very beginning, or it evolved over time, that you weren't all about who's a talented student or whatnot, but it was all about giving equal opportunity for all?
Again, my reading, my learning, my development was that you should reward effort, because talent is like, that's why they're there in the first place. They have talent, but you got to reward effort. And so we did actually provide some room, some scope for the best of the best to do extra training. And that's what we had a program we called the Targeted Athlete Program. And what that was the people who for a long period of time had shown high levels of commitment. They're the kid who never wants to stop training. They're the one who never takes a day from training. They're the ones who probably pick up information fairly well and can adapt and start to use it better than others. And so we found an opportunity to create extra training sessions for those players, but the normal sessions, no one was excluded from. And then the ones who didn't make it into the targeted program could then come and ask the question. So we say, well, how are you going in class? How are you going with your attendance? Why are you taking so many days off? They train harder than you. Were you in the gym? And so you can point to behaviors which are achievable regardless of your actual talent level, that they could then follow and start to chase. And some of those players then actually elevated themselves. But at the base level, I have a responsibility to every student when I'm a teacher, every student, to try and give them the same opportunity to get progress. Then it's what they do with it. Then we can choose to reward that differently.
Yeah, and I think that's often if for the parents or the listeners who are parents out there when it comes to their child's sporting journey and whatnot, something that I feel is often overlooked with it is to do with the skills. So what you've just mentioned there, the behaviors and the traits and everything that come with participating and learning through sport, they're behaviors that can be taken beyond the sporting realm. And as you mentioned earlier on, in whether or not they make it into the elite football world or not, the lessons that they've learned, in whether it be they've been dropped from the team or they're not given that opportunity in the example that you've used, but they're lessons that they can build resilience, learn, overcome adversity, and be a part of that just sheerly through the football program itself. And I think that's something that a lot of parents now are overlooking when it comes to essentially asking or demanding why their son or their daughter hasn't been named in a particular team. It's giving them the ownership to be able to do that. So I really, really like that. I think from my end, there's a couple of things that stood out from, I suppose, the nuts and bolts of it, of what we were responsible for. So we being you being the football coach, me being the supplementary resource, being the strength and conditioning coach. And training load is a big one in youth sport. And for me, I distinctly remember, not so much in the early years because they're still navigating what that looks like as footballers, but as they started to get older and start making some representative teams like the New South Wales Institute of Sport and things like that, and different teams accordingly, there were specific times where you had removed them from your technical sessions. And then you'd also said to me specifically, they're not going to participate in the gym today. Can you perhaps take them for a recovery session, for a stretch session or something like that? And that may have been the age group as a whole for that particular session, or it may have been individual athletes and footballers in your team. So can you shed a little bit of insights into how important that cross collaboration is between, say, football staff, supplementary staff, and perhaps even other key stakeholders like institutes and things like that, in being able to individualize the load of footballers?
So really interesting topic. Nath, what it comes down to, I think, is about ownership. Do we own the athlete? And I think a lot of coaches take it's my player and my program, and they must be successful for me. And, I need this and I need that. And they forget the point that for for an athlete to be successful, they're probably going to have multiple coaches over multiple years, multiple environments where they have responsibility. And where are we actually owning the player? And so the perspective we took was, if we give a little bit, in terms of we be a bit mindful of not putting the player in the situation where they have to lie to their coach somewhere else, etc. You take the pressure off them. You say, look, it's okay. We know you love what you do here. So when we can, we're going to train you as hard as we can. And when it's best for you, we're going to modify what you do here so that you can also be successful somewhere else. In a perfect world, when it's a situation with a young athlete, it's probably a roundtable discussion between all the people who have influence over a week. And for them to actually go, let's just put down our ownership here, because we all want the person, the athlete, to be successful. And we have to be honest, and we might all think we're the best coach. But at the end of the day, there's a reason why they're at the other environment as well. And with Westfields, it was they were there for their education as well as their sport. The fact that you could walk out of a classroom and a few minutes later be on a football pitch with other dedicated young athletes, with a coach who's dedicated, who's qualified, who's prepared, who's going to push you, and an hour or so later you're back in maths. Like that can't happen many other places. But we knew they were always going to a club or an institute, and that was also important to them. So I think the approach is key. I do think there's a lot of issues around loads, because you being the conditioning guy, and that's not my area, you sometimes have to overload yourself to adapt, so there have to be times when you actually take on a load that might be beyond what you're used to for you to grow. But there are certainly other times where it's important to whether it's tapering or whatever, to actually reduce the load. And so people just throwing a comment at you, oh, how many minutes have done this week? Well, what are those minutes? And by the way, are they mentally fatigued by it, or are they actually motivated by it? Are they happy? And so there's a human side to the whole concept of loading. But very much my point would be, don't think you own the athlete. It's like we do it now when the Socceroos and Matildas are actually selected, when they're named in the squad, it names their junior club, the first club they played at. And the point there was, we're trying to let people know we respect what you did. You chipped in a little bit, but they all probably went to 4 or 5 other clubs on their way to making the national team. We still respect where they started. And I think if people took the approach of, I'm just adding a piece or helping with a piece for the athlete, as opposed to owning them, I think it will be much easier.
Yeah, I really like that. That's great insights, and particularly at a national level. I love the fact that you guys have gone to the depth to do that, and I think something to further reinforce what you've said from my end, something that also stood out throughout all these discussions was how you were proactive in reaching out to, whether it be clubs, whether it be institutes and whatnot, not only for your own and our, as your staff, your team, essentially in our development, but part of those discussions were about exactly that. What's going on here? What are you guys doing here too? So I think that's quite often missed in the youth setting, is opening that discussion for whatever reason, if it's time or fear of people seeing what goes on in the inside. But I love how you've I suppose labeled it that ownership side of things, in that nobody owns the athlete. So I think you've
and mate, if I could actually just add something there, just came to mind as you said that, is that there were certain times where we sat down with the athlete and tried to educate them on how they could engage with each of the stakeholders, so they could take responsibility. They could be the one to ring the coach if they were maturing enough to be at a level where they could do that. When you could see they couldn't handle that kind of pressure, then we took it off them. But when we felt they were ready, then could they start to to manage their own environment. And I think that's an important step, because to become a professional athlete, if it was in a different sport like tennis or something, then you build a team around yourself to keep you at the level you need to be. So sorry to interrupt, mate, but just...
No, that's great. Yeah, because I just love the empowering nature of it, where you're setting them up to, and you've mentioned about if they're ready. So at that stage of, are they mature enough to have those conversations, and also hear what the coach has to say back too, because it's not a one-way street of everyone just getting what they want all the time. So I love that element of empowering that you're putting, or I suppose trying to build in the athletes, being a development pathway. So no, I really enjoyed that, and thanks for the insights on it. So you've been fortunate to transition into the professional realm in a full-time capacity for several years now. Are there any particular traits that stand out for the parents out there listening that separate elite footballers from, I suppose you could say, sub-elite? Or perhaps another way to phrase it would be that those who make it and last to those who don't or might not last as long?
I think at the core of it, it's the love of the game. And, there's one thing to say, like, I love the game and I watch the game. And there's another thing to, they're probably walking around the house with a ball at their feet. And it's not because someone's told them to, it's just who they are. And it could be a love of sport in general. I think that's the one, all those old statements about when no one is watching and you're doing the work, that's because of a love of the sport, right? You can't enforce that on them. That's actually got to be within the athlete. I think they also need to understand that it's okay to fail and be road tested at that, like fail multiple times, and actually the parents find the right way to support them at that time, right? It's going to be okay, I think you raised it earlier, do they go ringing a coach if the kid got taken off the pitch? Well, actually, no, you don't. And if anyone's going to do it, it's going to be the athlete themselves. They're going to go and ask the question, how do I get better? And you teach them how to frame that. So the ones that are successful, you only have to describe the standards once in a national team camp of what's expected, and they're there. And then they're looking to try and drive other players to come up. You see when you put them into the toughest environment in a match, you can see which ones revel when the nerves are up. The ones that have that. So, and I think a lot of that's from inside of them, and so you're helping them recognize those characteristics in themselves. And sometimes, you can actually in a program like Westfield's, you can over times you can help with the bumps and bruises and help them understand that those are all going to be good in the end. But the ones who make it, I think it's their dream. It's their dream, not someone else's. Although they often want to kind of do it for someone in their family. They want to do it because they want to make them proud. They love the game, and so they just, whatever it takes, they're going to turn up and do it because they just want to stay involved and they want to challenge themselves at the highest level. And then I think the last one is their response to opportunity. So a lot of them, how do you get your first go? If it's a team sport, how do you break into the team for the first time? And it could be because of an injury. It could be because you're great training form. It could be whatever it is. It's how you take that opportunity. And you don't have to be perfect. It's more that the people who are coaching see this person's got, in particular, above the technical and physical things, they've got the mental qualities to live here.
Yeah. Yeah, so a big thing that's resonating with me of everything that you're talking, aside from in the formative years, is the fun element to it, where they build that just love for the game. But a key, if you want to throw a word on it, would be intrinsic motivation, in that eventually there'll come a time where their parents aren't there pushing them. And I suppose those survivors or thrivers in it are those who are really intrinsically motivated. So yeah, that's great. And I suppose something for me, as I've evolved over the years, and I think you and I have been really fortunate, maybe you just a tiny little bit longer when it comes to how long you've been coaching and seeing the athletes coming through, is I'm particularly interested in the trends with physical activity and youth and their, I suppose some might call it movement capacity or physical literacy. You've got plenty of runs on the board. I think it was, from memory, 1997. You were originally firstly the director of football at Westfield Sports High. Have you seen there been a physical shift in their, I suppose, physicality and what athletes now are capable of producing over than I suppose kind of 15, 20 years ago of the athletes and students that were coming through?
Yeah, they're obviously, you can't deny it. It's always the challenge is to measure it. Who is the best player over time and that type of thing. But we can all see the games are getting faster, and so you've got to, and the power required to perform is there. So they're probably bigger, stronger, quicker athletes in general than what they were. But example, a longer time ago, and they were more involved in every sport, and they went to the athletics carnival and the swimming carnival, and they played, almost every sport they could for the school because they were an all-rounder type of thing, and then they excelled in maybe one or two sports. One of the things that's kind of at times missing now is some of the physical literacy and some of the spatial awareness that comes from playing multi-sports. So we often will say, a very talented young footballer at the moment, quite often we'll see that they'll misjudge the flight of a ball, especially a longer ball. And I know we've got a big issue around heading and concussion now to worry about as well, but you'll see a longer pass played where really you've got a lot of time to track the flight and position yourself and be in a position to, and then the ball will bounce a metre or 2 metres behind them and they kind of make a half jump at the ball. And you think, well, how is it that it's gone 50 metres and but you can do amazing things with the ball when you have it. So, would that person, if they'd grown up playing cricket as well or various other ball sports, judge the flight of the ball differently? And then obviously, the movement skills. I think one of the things that football can probably give to most other games is that the coordination you develop with football, not only your footwork, but the fact you're manipulating the article at the same time with your feet. So there's not many other sports where that happens. With hockey, you're moving your feet quick, but you got a stick to manipulate the ball. If it's a handball sport, basketball, rugby, then you've got to move your feet quick and you've got to watch out for someone who actually wants to pick you off, but you've got the ball in your hand. It's a different. So football is very challenging and could give a lot to other sports in that way. So I'd encourage coaches to allow their athletes to do different sports. And a couple of quick examples is I visited quite a few English Premier League clubs who used to, in the years gone by, tell their students you can't do PE at school. And now they actually have them in at the club and they'll do a PE lesson at the club. And so you can see an English Premier League club, you can see kids playing NFL as part of what is a physical literacy class. So they're bringing that back into that environment. And you see things like that, Nathan, you think, well, it's all circular nature. It's all cyclical, but we shouldn't ignore the actual positive impact of loving sport, playing other sports and picking up skills in other sports.
Yeah, I love how specific the example that you used in the header with football, and I just wanted to share some insights with you because in our first guest episode we had Darren Burgess, who obviously we both know, and he used the example about Ajax being that when the younger formative years they have capoeira and they have a variety of different other sports that all the Ajax footballers actually have to participate in as a part of the academy to try and build that skill set. And I think it's interesting because, a lot of these big clubs with, multi-million-dollar clubs and things like that, obviously also acknowledging that they're there for football, but in the formative years, it's really about exploration of movement, and they're all investing in that space. And you've highlighted there in the English Premier League clubs that they do it as well. So I think that's a really good example on a variety of different fronts for different sports to learn from too, because some sports in their formative years or other sports are a little bit more down the track when it comes to their development pathways. And if those type of clubs are investing in that space, then I think it's a bit of a no-brainer that rather than just spending, all day, every day, just targeting, using football as an example. So that's unreal. And I suppose the last question that I've got for you, and there's an element of it where you've touched on multiple elements too, or suggestions with it. If you had one bit of advice for parents that are listening out there and they've got a talented footballer, or perhaps they've got a talented son or daughter in another sport, do you have one bit of advice for them being parents in their child's sporting journey?
Yeah, thanks for giving me a little heads up on this one. I wrote something down, but I'm just going to say, Nate, straight up, it's just be a great parent, and that means you love them regardless of what the career choice they have. And I wrote down that you should lead, you should guide. It should all be about them being the best person, and then the sport-specific experiences. They're just learning things along the way. We had a great coach walk into Westfields during the Olympic Games, and he'd written a lot of books in Europe about coaching. And he introduced himself and he asked me a question. He said, "How will you teach a child to cross the road?" And this was very much his philosophy of coaching. And the answer it came down to was, well, I would hold their hand and get them to look both ways, and then say to them, "You tell me when we're ready to go." Right. Okay. And so, or you think about it, that what that means, that the child has to make the decision, but you're not going to let them fail in a way that's going to hurt them. Safe failure, no problem. But if they're going to get run over by a bus, then you're holding their hands. So I think that's what a parent should be doing. For sure, we all fall in love with the dream of our child being a musician or being a this or being a that. And I don't think most people even worry about the money of it. It's just more about, wow, how cool would it be if they could do that and they show interest. But try to remember the most important thing is that they have to be normal people when they do that. So We had an incident with my son. He'd asked permission to come. He was in primary school and he wanted to come to Westfields and see what the whole thing was, you know. So we'd made an agreement on what day it was going to be. It happened. And after school one afternoon, the day before, the teacher came to my wife for the first time ever and just said, "Oh, listen, Oliver was a little bit not himself today. He's a bit naughty in class and didn't do a few things right." And she'd never spoken to my wife at all about him ever. So we just cancelled his visit to the school. And he went to school the next day as normal. And the teacher found it and said, "Oh, no, it wasn't that big a deal. I didn't mean it was that big a thing. He should have gone." And we said, "No, it was. He'll get another chance to go, but he has to understand you wouldn't have reached out if it wasn't something that was out of the ordinary." And so we have to apply it at home as well. You want them to be a good person. You want them to respect other people. You want them to be present where they are and be good at what they're asked to do. And then the rewards will come elsewhere. And the fact that they love a sport and you're going to help them push themselves to the edge, you're going to exhaust your finances and your time to make that possible. They're all things you do because you love them, but it shouldn't be because you've now got sucked into a dream of it's going to happen. And because then what happens is the child's identity changes to pleasing you about achieving in sport as opposed to just loving you being there to support them. And that's I think a huge dangerous area.
Firstly, I just want to say thanks very much for sharing the personal side of the story there. That's I just want to say reiterate that. I completely agree with you. I think a lot of parents who will reach out to me and things like that when it comes to say presentations at their schools and things, and I think that the number one thing going back to what you're saying is the identity of the athlete. And no, I don't think any parent, and I think I speak for both of us, is that I don't think any parent wants to get to a stage where their son or daughter hates a particular sport. And then not only that, there's a broken relationship from, with their parents and their family because they've grown up feeling like they're a failure, that they haven't achieved their so-called potential or where their parents envisaged them that they were likely to turn out. And unfortunately for every Lionel Messi around the world, there's billions who don't make it in that space. And I suppose at the end of the day, through sport, it's about trying to get the family unit and collective as a whole throughout the entire stages of maturation until they're young adults into adulthood, in that there's a positive relationship between all of them. So I completely agree with what you're saying when it comes to that identity.
And if that's the path you go down, like the risk is that it could be in the same day you're rewarding them for making a representative team, but they were disgustingly rude to their grandmother, or they were kicked out of class. So that athlete, of course, there are going to be times where that happens, and maybe you need to support them and go, "Wow, look what you can achieve, but this is not acceptable."
Yeah. Hey, parenting. I'm only in my early stages, as we spoke about before, mate, and it's a wild ride, and I empathize with every parent out there. It's not easy.
Yeah.
I know you're a busy guy, Trev, so before we wrap it up, so I won't keep you any longer, but I want to put you on the spot here. So every guest who comes on has to go through the power round before they depart the episode. And so I've got 3 words for you, and each of those words you can reply with the first thing that comes into your head with a single word, or you can wrap it up with a short sentence after it. So the first word that I have for you is football.
My life.
Perfect. High performance.
Something you're always chasing.
A destination, you might say. And then the final one is development pathways.
Crucial.
Very good. Okay, Trevor Morgan, that's a wrap. Thank you very much for being our second guest on the Get Down podcast.
Thanks, Nathan, and great time to spend some time with you, mate. Yeah, been very, very much enjoyable.
Really appreciate it, mate. Absolute legend. Thanks, bud. Huge thanks to Gymaware, the #1 velocity-based training company on the market, for bringing you these guest episodes. Don't forget to check out their fundamentals of VBT certification using code VBTFUN30 for our listeners, so get in quick. A big thanks once again to our platinum sponsor, the team at Play, for sponsoring the Get Down podcast. Be sure to visit play.us or our show notes for further information.
1